Hi, Savanah.
Hi, Ryan.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about the 2019 miniseries Looking for Alaska. All right, first, as always, we would like to say thank you to our patrons on Patreon, as well as thank you to our sponsors who help us out on the podcast. If you or anyone you know might be interested in sponsoring us, our email is in our description, and please hit us up and let us know if you'd like to connect.
Thank you so much. And in this episode, we will give a trigger warning for suicide and smoking. So if you are sensitive to any of those topics, please feel free to click off.
And so today we are super excited because it is our second iteration of Teenybopper Tuesday. Last time we talked about Degrassi The Next Generation, and today we're doing something that's still kind of nostalgic for Ryan and I, Looking for Alaska, and we're excited to share this with y'all.
Yeah, I wouldn't say kind of it's nostalgic. I think this is incredibly nostalgic. For me. Honestly, this is not something that I was expecting to revisit in my 20s, I would say. So it came up and revisited me in a way that I was not expecting. So quick background, I'm pretty familiar with Looking for Alaska and its author. So Looking for Alaska is an American teen drama. It's a Hulu exclusive created by Josh Schwartz. It's based on the 2005 novel written by John Green. John Green is pretty famous, especially around the YouTube community. He is kind of like a what's that word, Savanah? Capstone? Like when you're like integral to the community. What's the word that I'm looking for?
I'm not sure.
He's a pillar within the community of YouTube, along with his brother Hank. And now they're both authors, and I know that the majority of the revenue does come from their authorship, but their kind of other job is that they are both co-creators of Complexly, which is partnered with PBS, and so they're responsible for Crash Course and SciShow and a lot of educational content that I know a lot of the younger folks are familiar with and may only know him from Crash Course. So the casting I felt in Looking for Alaska, the miniseries, was very recognizable. I feel like I recognize everyone from like something or had seen them somewhere, even though I'm not familiar with any of these names. We have Christine Frosseth as Alaska Young, Charlie Plummer as Pudge, and Denny Love as the Colonel.
So a quick little synopsis of Looking for Alaska. It is kind of your classic coming of age tale. Miles, aka Pudge, grows up in Florida and he doesn't like his high school. He kind of has this mission that he wants to seek out his own great perhaps. So he decides to change schools, go to the boarding school that his father attended in order to go out on this journey. Once he's there, he becomes friends with his roommate, the Colonel, who introduces him to Alaska and some of their other friends on campus. He very quickly becomes like one of the gang. They initiate a prank war with some of the like popular, rich, cool kids at the school due to some discrepancies of some drama that has gone down amongst the students that involved some other students, Alaska's roommate, getting kicked out of school. So it's kind of like pranks back and forth trying to figure out who the rat is, because that's like the number one rule at Culver Creek is to not be a rat and not to rat anybody out. The story just goes back and forth, them pulling pranks on one another until things get going a little too far, and eventually, I don't know, I guess I don't want to say necessarily what happens, but well, I don't know. How do I give a synopsis for the ending without ruining the ending?
The story does take place before, so there is an after section. So a traumatic event does happen, which causes the show to shift its tone to become an after part of the miniseries and the book. So relationship with the book and the author, just so we can kind of get our biases out of the way. I am a fan of John Green. I have been for quite a while, since I was in junior high. So I mean, like, what, 15 years or so, 12 years, I don't know. And Savanah, I think you were a fan first. I feel like this happens quite frequently, Savanah, where you are a fan first and I say a fan longer. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I think I remember reading Looking for Alaska in the 7th grade, possibly the 6th grade, but probably the 7th grade. And I read it before I like knew of John Green, like before I had seen him on YouTube or anything like that. And I did really like the book when I read it in junior high. And then from there, similarly, Ryan, we kind of, I think, both fell into the cult of the Vlog Brothers on YouTube. I haven't read actually that many of John Green's books, surprisingly. I've only read Looking for Alaska and The Fault in Our Stars. Although I think I did try to read like Abundance of Catherines and Paper Towns like probably multiple times. I just never ended up getting through them. But since probably high school, I don't think I have been as into John Green. I think that's probably a combination of things of just when I was in high school, I just stopped reading as much as I had been before. And then also I just kind of stopped reading traditional or like contemporary YA books, I guess, as often as I did before, because I started just really reading what I needed to read for school. So there was that. And then I think, I don't know. I've been trying to pinpoint in my head why it was I suddenly stopped liking John Green, like YouTube content as much. And I'm still not really sure why. I do often go back to his educational content quite often, just if I need to learn something. My boyfriend and I are both fans of the art assignment, so we've seen lots of those videos as well.
I never fully fell off the Nerdfighteria bandwagon. That's what the group of like community is called Nerdfighteria. I've been always a fan of Harry Potter, and it's been integral to who they are. Like Hank Green is a part of a rock band spelled WROCK, which is Wizard Rock. And I've read all of John's books to this date, and I'm a supporter of their Project for Awesome, which is a big fundraising event that they have at the end of the year. They recently also, I contributed to their fundraising opportunity with opening up a pregnancy center in Sierra Leone, like a birth center to help decrease their mortality rate in infants and in women. So I feel like I keep up to date with them. In college, I didn't watch all their content consistently, and now I don't watch every YouTube video. But I have been listening to their podcast, Dear Hank and John, a lot, just because I have a lot of opportunities to listen to podcasts at work. Yeah, I'm just really proud to be a part of the community, and I've just never fallen off. There was a brief period I don't know if I'm going too long, but there was a brief period where I think every kind of older girl had this weird kind of recognition, like, why am I listening to these middle-aged men, and why are they catering to me? It feels a little weird, but I kind of grew out of that and was like, I think they're still good people, and they listen to their community, and they have addressed that, so I'm okay.
I will also just throw in that Ryan and I did both go to, what was it called, Ryan? The Fault in Our Tour? The Fault in Our Star Tour?
Yeah, we did go to a...
What was it called?
It was the book signing for The Fault in Our Stars. I don't remember what it was called, though, yeah.
So we did meet them very briefly once.
We did meet them very briefly.
They are some of the few famous people that I have met.
I've seen Hank Green in concert twice. Savanah, you've seen him once in concert.
No, do you count The Fault in Our Stars one? Because then I have seen him twice, because I took you to Tucson that one time to see him.
That's true. Well, I've seen him in concert 3 times, if we're counting that one. So what was it like reading the book in 2008? And what is it like watching the miniseries now? I mean, I have a lot of feelings about it, but I'm very curious because I watched it when it came out in 2019. And so I told you when I watched it, I said it was really good and I really liked it. So I'm very eager to hear what you have to say first.
So first we'll go back, I guess, to my first experience with reading Looking for Alaska. Like I kind of mentioned, I did really like it when I read it in the 7th grade, which is probably like around 2007. And yeah, I really liked it. I felt like at the time found it to be very impactful. It was probably my favorite book for quite a while, actually. I did not watch it when it very first came out on Hulu, I think because, I don't know, I think I was like kind of unsure because wasn't there like, was there an Abundance of Catherine's movie? No, it was a Paper Towns movie.
It was Paper Towns movie, which I also liked. It was very cute.
I feel like I had heard not positive things about that, which then made me feel like, maybe Looking for Alaska, like, isn't at the top of my list of things to watch. And by that time, I already, like, kind of fallen out from watching so much of their content and being involved with, like, everything that they have going on. So it just kind of fell by the wayside, even though I did like consciously always think that I did want to eventually go back to it and watch it. So today in 2021, I finally watched it and I did enjoy it. I think I liked it more than I thought I would. I think I had my expectations like pretty low of what it was going to be. I don't know why. I mean, I like a lot of Hulu original shows, so I don't know why really I was thinking that it was going to be bad. But it wasn't. I enjoyed it. I found it to be like more touching than I thought it would be. Like I was like, I'm not gonna cry. Like I already know what's gonna happen. Like it's not gonna be that big of a deal. But no,
I cried.
Sure enough, I was crying. And I did find it to be very touching and nostalgic, and I really enjoyed, and I'm happy that I went back and watched it in 2021.
And if it's not clear, we are going to be discussing spoilers, so we're going to mention the reason why we cried. So if you haven't left already, please leave now. I don't think I really fully understand the book when I first read it. Savanah, this might be one of the few times you were right to be like, Rian, I think this book is too mature for you. And I think it was when I first read it. I did revisit it in high school after one of our bandmates had committed suicide. And I think I found it to be more insightful and true to life then. And I think Looking for Alaska really contributed to my identity a lot back then. I was very impressionable and I wanted to be like Alaska. And I think remnants of trying to be like that are still in me today. It was super nostalgic. Like as soon as that, I think it was a song, the Killer song in the beginning that they were playing from Hot Fuss. But like it just hit and I was like, we're in 2000. They're printing out a map quest. I was just so happy to just be living in that fantasy of earlier times. And it made me incredibly happy. And I don't think it was too soon. Even though I feel like that time was not that long ago, it still felt like it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's like over 10 years ago. That is kind of a long time.
Yeah, I suppose. You know, I can remember saying that the first wine that I was going to try when I was 21 was going to be Strawberry Hill. And it wasn't. I did eventually try Strawberry Hill, but like it was a big impact. I also wanted to bring up real quick, something I've noticed when things are trying to appear nostalgic, no one wears bras.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I assumed that had like to do with maybe like Alaska's character, I guess. If you're referring to Alaska, that was my assumption. I don't know. I mean, there was like that whole thing, I feel like in the 90s where there was like a no bra movement. So maybe it was
in the 90s and the 2000s and in that 70s show, they don't wear bras. I feel like the 80s is like the only era where they quite notably always wear bras. But everything else, when they're trying to have like a nostalgic look back on, I feel like they're going to wear bras. I feel like when they show like 2020, in like 40 years, no one's going to be wearing bras. And it's going to be like, such a simpler time. No one was wearing bras.
Well, I mean, I feel like I stopped wearing bras in 2020.
See?
So I feel like that's true.
I'm not wearing a bra right now.
I'm a very nostalgic person. I'm not sure if it's because I'm a Cancer or what exactly, but I love anything that's nostalgic. So I really liked that aspect of the show. I don't feel like it was too soon. Like I kind of said, like that was not that long ago, really. But I mean, for us, like that was our adolescence. And I think they say like the things that you like in your adolescence are always going to be like the most you liked of anything because of like how your brain was. So it would probably just always felt nostalgic to us, no matter when it came out. We probably would have just always liked that about it.
I think they could have easily ruined it if they had modernized it. I don't think it would have been as good if they had set it in 2020. Or 2019 at the time, or 2018. I don't think it would have been as fun, at least for me. And when it did originally come out in 2019, it was a bit weird. It was like, really? Now? Like, we were supposed to get a movie 10 years ago, and we're getting a Hulu miniseries? That just seemed kind of odd. But I remember watching it, like, starting the first episode, and I was just immediately hooked, and I was like, yeah, this is the right time. And it didn't get a lot of press either. It didn't really get a lot of buzz or talk. It just kind of flew under the radar as a gem.
Yeah, I did feel like I was trying to remember because it's been so long since I've read the book. I did feel like there was some things that they did modernize, like for our viewer, because I'm imagining they made it for our generation who read the book as adolescents. So I think they did like add and sprinkle things in like for our modern sensibilities that I don't recall being in the book. Like specifically like the like specific language that Alaska was using when talking about feminism. I don't remember that being in the book. Like when she would go on rants about like the patriarchal gaze and things like that, and that all felt like things that TV shows nowadays kind of like throw in to almost be kind of like pandering. I don't know. Do you remember that in the book, Ryan? Was she like...
I do actually remember that in the book. I think that was one of my first like brush ups against like SJ warrior feminism, SJW feminism. I don't know if I would call that. I don't really even like using those terms, but like such an abrasive like use of those terms, at least to me at the time it seemed abrasive. So I don't think it was like as apparent and a part of her character, but I do remember things like that being said.
Yeah, and then the other thing I felt like was her style, like her clothes that she wore, because I know like that was like part of her character was that she wore like thrifted clothes, but all the clothes that Alaska wore were not your typical thrifted clothes. Those are like nice vintage clothes that you are not going to find at Goodwill. Like you got to go to a boutique to find those clothes, and those clothes I feel like are like cool vintage style as was in 2018 or even still today. And I don't think that that's probably what she would have actually been wearing at the time. Like that was, I think, the thing that probably threw me the most. Like I felt like Alaska's style just did not make sense for the time. That seemed too current.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that one. I think that's like she was very much the idealized version of what we imagined her in the book, like even more idealized than in the book, which I thought was fascinating to think about, that she was kind of pandered to our modern sensibilities for sure.
And the only other thing, this is not really having to do with it being a genre, just more so with Alaska and kind of differences. I felt like I remembered her being so much more mysterious in the book, and I didn't really feel like she was mysterious in the show.
I think they made her a little bit more of a main character. Like they showed her POV, and I think that helped. I think that helped her not be as much of a plot device to further Miles's own story. But we can elaborate a little bit more on that later if we want to discuss, or we can discuss now if we feel like Alaska fits into that like manic pixie dream girl vibe.
I don't know. I don't think I have ever really thought of her in that way. I think because, like I said, like she was always more like mysterious and kind of elusive in the books. And I think in my mind, when I first read it, I always thought of her as being like very independent and not necessarily just a plot device. But I feel like in the show, she felt more like the manic pixie dream girl type of archetype. She felt, like I said, like it felt like they were like pandering to a specific audience that was going to like her. Although I do think she had like much more agency and just interesting like character development and story arcs than your typical manic pixie dream girl does in most things.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to get the definition of manic pixie dream girl out of the way, at least one that I found from Awkward Languages Dictionary. So, especially in film, it's a type of female character depicted as vivacious and appealingly quirky, whose main purpose within the narrative is to inspire a greater appreciation for life in a male protagonist. And I think Alaska does do that, but I think she serves as like the manic pixie dream girl for the reader or the watcher as well in this instance. And she has her own question. Miles's question is different. It's what is the great perhaps, and hers is how do we get out of this labyrinth of suffering? And I think in the movie version, you get to see her own journey in answering that question, and you kind of can, at the end, grasp at straws to try to fiddle, just as the characters in the show do, of what was in her mind, and did she answer this question all along? And Miles still has his own question to answer, and they were two different narratives that I think came together and complemented each other. So I'm inclined to say that she is not a manic pixie dream girl, at least in the miniseries.
I would agree. Like, if I'm thinking of, like, your typical manic pixie dream girl, I think of somebody like Clementine in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or
Ramona.
Yeah, Ramona from Scott Pilgrim. Basically, like, any movie where there's, like, a quirky love interest. That is the manic pixie dream girl. And those characters often just don't have really anything happening for them in their own lives. They're only there to serve the purpose of, like, the men in their life, basically.
One more thing about Alaska is I feel like she was a good character. I feel like I actually do know people like that, and we can talk about kind of the eccentricity of these teens now. I feel like it's a good starting point here. I genuinely do feel like I know people like Alaska. I know that I wanted to be like Alaska, and I know that I wanted my college experience to be like Culver Creek was, because my high school experience sure was not going to be like that. I was too straight-laced. But I had this vision in my head that college was going to open up and I was going to meet sexually liberated people and have all these intense discussions all the time about everything. And I feel like my teachers even promoted that. They were like, oh, just wait till you get to college. You're going to be talking about Buddhism every day. You know, like, I think that was the atmosphere that that was fostered in high school, and what Looking for Alaska kind of suggested that high school was going to be, but in reality, it's kind of like a heightened version of anyone's high school experience.
I definitely feel like I do know people like Alaska, and a lot of the other characters in the book as well. I will say, though, the more that I've gotten to know people like Alaska, they're not my favorite people in the world. Like, they're kind of difficult to be around, you know? Like, I don't know. Like, just something about, like, the pretentious nature and just, like, never really knowing for sure, like, what is going on. Like, just the lack of, like, good communication and flightiness. I don't know. I feel like I've known quite a few people like Alaska at this point, and I'm just, I don't know. It's, the charm has worn off, perhaps.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that one. But, like, being introduced to it when you're young, I think those people are the people that stick out to you the most and have a big impact on you. I think the quote at the end, you know, the famous one, if people were like rain, I would be a drizzle and she would be a hurricane. I feel like it's kind of true to life. I do think that people are sometimes haven't fully developed into their own hurricane. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I do feel like other people have just way more force of charisma than I do, and they have a big impression on me, and I really do feel that, and it makes me up, you know?
I don't think I ever remember, I mean, maybe I did, but I don't remember wanting to necessarily be like Alaska. I think I definitely just identified more with Miles in the story, and I felt like that would probably be more so the type of story that I would end up having once I went to college versus wanting to be Alaska.
I don't buy that for a second. Says the girl who ran off from her, like, what, 6th birthday party to go sing Reflection by herself? I don't think so.
I don't know. For some reason, I feel like I didn't like Alaska when I read the book. I feel like I found myself feeling, like, irritated with her, and, like, I think I just don't like it when people just, like, disappear for no reason. I think that just, like, bothers me when people, like, are dramatic in that way. I don't know. I'm really not sure what it is. I've been, like, kind of racking my brain about a lot of the feelings that I had about this book when I very first read it, and I can't put my finger on necessarily why it was I didn't love Alaska, but there was something about her when I first read it that, like, just kind of bothered me a little bit. I'm not sure, though. Maybe it was just the mystery. I don't like things to be unsolved. So maybe that is just what it was. She was just too mysterious, and that just, like, bugged me, maybe.
And then her death was mysterious as well, which it kind of wrapped up her character arc very, I wouldn't say cleanly, because it's a mystery, but it made kind of a perfect package of Alaska and what we're supposed to consume and think about and get out of the story. Real quick about the other characters, the main ones we had were Takumi, which is kind of like their side prankster companion. We had the Colonel, who was kind of like the third in the trio. If you have Miles, Alaska, and then the Colonel is also Miles' roommate. And then we had Laura, who is this foreign exchange student girl who tries to have like a love story with Miles and kind of ends up being a part of the group at the end of the story after Alaska dies. And I thought they were a lot better in the miniseries than they were in the book. A lot more charming. I remember not really wanting to spend time with them in the book.
I agree. And I feel like specifically, I really liked how they made Lara's character in the show. I feel like I don't recall her being that expanded upon in the book. And I liked how they kind of changed it. Because I did feel like in the book, from what I remember, was kind of served more as just like the purpose of being there as a plot device for Miles. Whereas in the show, I feel like they just expanded on her a lot more in interesting and thoughtful ways.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I mean, the main reason why I remember Laura is I think it's because it's the first sex scene that I've ever read in my entire life. And it was an oral sex scene. And it was depicted like, it was very uncomfortable for me to read at the time. I can remember it. It was not great. It's not great. It still brings me embarrassment to this day, I swear.
I can tell. Also, I feel like I remember I read the book and then my mom read it after I was done, and then she was like, I don't know if you should be reading this. I feel like that was a conversation that was had.
No, your mom wants to be banning those books, Savanah?
I guess, I mean, she did also have reservations about Breaking Dawn, so.
And Degrassi.
But my mom still took us to buy Breaking Dawn when it came out, like, at the midnight premiere, so.
Yeah.
I don't know what her convictions are about these things.
So, to kind of talk about something that I feel like is talked about too much by conservatives, I just kind of feel like we should mention it, just because it is kind of a theme, maybe, I don't know, but very prevalent is this drinking, smoking, sex, and how it's portrayed. I really love the quote, still do to this day. Y'all smoke to enjoy it, I smoke to die. It's one of the greatest lines I've ever read. Like, it sticks in my mind. I love that line so much.
Yeah. I feel like it's one of those things where now some of these lines from the book, like this one and the hurricane one, just like are a little cringy to me. Just I think in probably all of the like Tumblr contexts I've seen them in. But I mean, originally it was a good line. Kind of interestingly, I think with this is that like if you're thinking about today, I guess if like teens would like Looking for Alaska the miniseries today or find it relatable, statistically teens are not using drugs and alcohol or having sex as often as they used to. It's been decreasing over time, but this generation specifically is like notably using these things less. So I don't feel like Looking for Alaska is like too over the top as compared to something like Euphoria, where they're like drug use is like insane and everybody's having sex like all the time and it's very explicit. Looking for Alaska I think is probably like normal enough to where like sure like some people aren't gonna have that experience. Like I don't think you and I had experiences like that in high school, but some people did. I think it was believable enough as far as that goes.
And I wonder if the statistics are different for private school versus public school. I would imagine they would be.
Well, I tried to look this up because that's what I was thinking too. In my mind, I was thinking that these things probably happen more at private schools than they do at public schools. But it was really hard to tell because when I Googled it, like all the top websites that came up were like forums about private schools and boarding schools, like for potential people who'd want to go to school there. So it seemed like they were saying like, oh, it's not any more worse than public school is. But I would not think that. I would think it'd be like much more of an issue at a private school just because of the fact that like it's a congregate living situation and they're there all the time and it's probably just easier to get away with things.
And I imagine if you're wealthy,
yeah,
you'll have more access to buying drugs as well. Like that's just a logical connection that my brain's making. I do not have any evidence to back this up though.
I mean, it makes sense to me. That's what I also thought as well. The other thing that would be probably something that teens today could identify with is that suicide, unfortunately, is increasing amongst teens as the years go on, specifically with this generation. So that as a kind of part of the story, I think would also identify with teens today, as well as teens, unfortunately, also in our generation and generations prior to that.
I thought that everything was done rather well in as far as like the portrayal of drinking and smoking and they didn't really do drugs, so I guess that's not really a part of the conversation. But it felt very realistic. I didn't feel like they were trying to talk down to their audience at all. In Degrassi, I do feel like they often talk down to their audience a little bit here and there on some things.
The thing that I did not think was believable was the Colonel's, like, milk concoction. Like, that is so disgusting. Like, who is going to do that?
But that's real. That's from John's private school experience. That's real, Savanah.
I don't know.
So I think that John does kind of take some of his experiences from going to school in the, 80s. He went to high school in the 80s. He went to, like, a private school, like they did here. So I think he's taking a lot of those, I think you were allowed to smoke in high school in the 80s, weren't you? So, like, a lot of those things do make its way to the book, you know. Mom, please leave a comment below if you're watching. If you don't leave a comment, I'll know you're not watching. Let me know. Were you smoking in the 80s at school?
I did appreciate that it wasn't like they were drinking, like, some, like, designer alcohol. Like, the Strawberry Hill that they were drinking, like, that makes sense for something that they would be able to actually purchase at the time. Mm-hmm. Before we move on, I do just want to bring up, I guess, like, a question about, like, is this type of representation, like, okay? Like, is it good for teens to see other teens, like, drinking or doing drugs or smoking or things like that? Is it just, like, is it good for them to see it because it's, like, the reality of what they will probably be facing? I think that some shows, like, do it better than others as far as if they're, like, glamorizing it. But what do you think about that?
That's complicated because I think this book is the only book that's ever really motivated me to try a cigarette. Which I don't think was the purpose of this book. So I'm just gonna say that.
Okay. I mean, it's hard to deny. I feel like smoking just always looks cool, even if it's bad for you. So kind of moving on from that, and thinking about whether or not how relatable Looking for Alaska is as compared to other YA or coming of age stories, I do just kind of want to, like, situate Looking for Alaska within the canon of other coming of age stories and kind of compare it maybe to some notable others, and see whether or not this book might continue on within generations like some other books have, or maybe if it'll fall to the wayside a little bit.
As the authority on coming of age stories in our family, I'm the only reader, like, really avid reader in our family.
It's true.
So for the canon that we were forced to read in high school, so we did have the same experiences, me and Savanah reading the same exact books in high school. The coming of age books that we were forced to read were A Separate Peace, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Catcher in the Rye. I believe those are the only ones that we were forced to read. Stan, I don't recall if you were made to read The Outsiders, but I was not made to read The Outsiders.
No, I was not. I was also not forced to read Catcher in the Rye. I, like, chose to read it for a project for school.
I was forced to read Catcher in the Rye. Or maybe I wasn't. Maybe I did choose that out of my own volition because you were reading it and I didn't want you to get, like, one up on me. Other notable coming of age books that you might read in a classroom are Speak, Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell is another one. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secret of the Universe, I know is starting to make its way into schools. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, also starting to make its way. A Black coming of age story, which we notably don't really have or are forced to read ever in high school.
I feel like if you are the, what did you say? The authority? If you are the authority on coming of age stories, like books, I feel like I might be the authority on coming of age films, because I feel like coming of age movies are, like, my favorite type of movie pretty often. Mm-hmm. Specifically, I thought it was kind of interesting. Looking for Alaska, the miniseries, they made a very, like, direct reference to The Graduate, which I thought was a strange choice because in a modern setting, I feel like that movie is kind of iffy. Kind of some yikes moments in that movie. So it was like, I don't know why they're trying to make us remember that right now, but it is what it is. It's specifically like the scene at the end with Miles, like when he's like swimming in a swimming pool and his parents were trying to talk to him. I digress. My favorite coming of age story that I think really overtook Looking for Alaska, well, actually, okay, it's kind of complicated because I think for the longest time, I always said it was The Catcher in the Rye. But I think the truth was it was The Perks of Being a Wallflower, but Catcher in the Rye sounded better to like say to people versus The Perks of Being a Wallflower. But I read both of them, I think, maybe when I was a sophomore. And The Perks of Being a Wallflower really became my favorite, and I think I really connected with that story on like a very deep and emotional level when I was a teenager.
I think we all need to re-examine what we read as a teenager and ask ourselves, does it still hold up? And I'm not quite sure that The Perks of Being a Wallflower does still hold up. I think that I would probably choose to give Looking for Alaska to classrooms rather than Perks of Being a Wallflower at this point in my life. And I can't think of any coming-of-age story that I've read that has been so perfect recently, except for The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. Which is a coming-of-age story set against the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think is kind of timeless at this point. And also To Kill a Mockingbird, I would say, is pretty timeless as well, just because of the political background. So it's kind of like a history lesson along with coming-of-age, which I find fascinating.
If you are interested in coming-of-age stories, you should definitely check out our podcast on Persepolis as well, where we go into that as being a coming-of-age story. Some of my favorite recent coming-of-age films that I have enjoyed, I really liked Mid-90s. That movie I thought was so good. I also really enjoyed 8th Grade.
Lady Bird has been like the hit. Everyone talks about Lady Bird.
Mid-90s really blew my mind, I think, though. That one was like my favorite movie for a while.
But I guess if I had to choose a mid-2000s novel that I had to force a classroom to read, like if we had to read a coming-of-age story from like every decade or something, I might choose Looking for Alaska. I might, yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably would too. Like I said, it's been a while since I've read The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I definitely think I would choose Looking for Alaska over The Fault in Our Stars.
That came out in 2012, I think, so it wouldn't technically fall into like the decade rule that I just set there.
Well, okay.
I also want you to just off to the side. In Perks of Being a Wallflower, rape is used as a plot twist, and sexual abuse is used as a plot twist. I'm just putting that in your mind.
Well, I'm not saying it's my favorite book now. I'm just saying it was my favorite book when I was like 15 years old.
What's your favorite coming of age book now?
My favorite coming of age book now would probably be Bless Me Ultima, if that counts. I think that counts as a coming of age story, which I did read in high school, but I recently reread this past summer, and I like really fell in love with it and kind of had a journey. I feel like with that book specifically, and we kind of talked about this in the Persepolis episode, but we read that in high school and I liked it, but I kind of was like bullied into not liking it, I guess, almost in a way, because I feel like my class like made fun of it all the time and we're like, this book is so weird, there's Mexican witchcraft in it, that's like, nobody likes that. And so then I was like, oh, well, I guess I don't like it either. And then the author died over the summer and I reread it, and at the time I found it to be very close to home because our grandmother had just passed away, and it's about his relationship with his grandmother. So I really liked rereading it, and that is now probably my favorite coming of age story. Also, I'd like to point out that To Kill a Mockingbird also is, I think, a problematic coming of age story, just in how it like presents a like white savior situation.
It is. But I think that it does more good than bad. Kind of completely like jumping topics here. I wanted to talk about the adults as they are portrayed in Looking for Alaska, the miniseries, specifically a relationship towards the adults in Degrassi, if we are keeping this up with the miniseries, because I found the portrayal of adults in Looking for Alaska so much more appealing. They really did feel like human beings, as opposed to Degrassi, where they kind of felt like paper human beings that had like two levels of emotion, which was being angry and being pseudo-supportive.
These adults were like actual characters versus in Degrassi, they're like barely even characters. They're almost just like background people that are not really involved. I thought that everybody did a really good job. I liked Timothy Simmons in it. I think that he is hilarious. I love his character on Veep. I've only ever seen him in like comedic things before. So it was...
Is he the one that plays the eagle?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. He plays the eagle.
Yeah, he was funny.
Which I was really shocked when I saw that he was going to play, like, the principal of the school, because I've only ever seen him play, like, ridiculous characters. But I thought that he did a really good job. The only person that I felt kind of conflicted about was their religion teacher, Dr. Hyde. I mean, I liked his character. He was probably, like, one of the more interesting characters of the show, just like with his like history and background and like the lectures that he gave to the class and their assignments. However, I did feel like it kind of teeter on the magical Negro trope a little bit, which I think is not the best representation. But it wasn't like too extreme as far as that goes. The one adults though that I did feel like were just not fully thought out maybe were Miles's parents. Just because I felt like they were portrayed as being very, like, one-dimensional, like, almost like they just let their kid do whatever they wanted. Or let him do whatever he wanted. And when, like, Miles, like, really broke down to his mom at the end, she was just kind of like, well, okay. And then just, like, left the room. Like, she didn't say anything, like, insightful or thoughtful to him, which just seemed so bizarre to me. And it kind of made me laugh in the very beginning when he was telling his parents about how he wanted to go to school, and his mom was like, "'Cause you're going to find your great perhaps? What does that even mean?"
That was definitely like the worst point of the entire show. I think I've always been kind of iffy on Dr. Hyde. I liked him better in the book. I didn't appreciate him as much in here, just because he reminded me a lot of a college professor I had that I didn't like, who very deliberately chose favorites and like would ask people to leave the classroom all the time if they weren't paying rapt attention. And like he was just one of those professors that like really thought that he was like showing us the world and opening up like the door for us, showing us the light, like opening up our minds, like we couldn't handle it. I liked him. I liked the Dr. Hyde a lot better in my youth when he really was opening my mind and showing me the world and I wasn't as cynical.
Yeah, and I think he did remind me kind of like maybe some teachers in high school, like little elements here and there, and just like reminded me of like an appreciation of like the teachers that I had who did try to like open our minds to new ideas that we had never experienced or thought about before.
So one of the experiences and the big questions that Dr. Hyde does bring up, or I guess Alaska brings up to Dr. Hyde, and which Dr. Hyde helps facilitate at the end, is how do we get out of this labyrinth of suffering? And I don't know if you know this about me, Savanah, but that was the theme of my senior project for high school, was how do we get out of this labyrinth of suffering? So I had pretty fun time thinking about that question when I was a senior in high school. So I kind of just wanted to ruminate about the religious undertones of the piece, and whether we thought it was like pushing religion onto us or not. Should it have? I really have very mixed feelings about it and religion. I myself am not religious at all, and I do feel like this media makes me feel a little bit guilty for dismissing religion. And I try not to dismiss religion, so maybe that's a good thing. Just it reopens my mind up a little bit to religion, but I don't know how it makes you feel. It does make me feel complicated.
I don't think it makes me feel that complicated. I mean, I don't think I really understood like that question, I guess, like probably when I very first read it. And then in the meantime of reading the book and then coming to the show, I never really thought back to that part of the book. And watching the show for the first time, I actually got to think about that question as a part of the story. And I mean, I think it's like an important question. I mean, to me, I feel like it very clearly was written by somebody who has an interest in religion. I mean, I know John Green was like a youth minister, wasn't he? Like briefly.
Yeah. Well, he majored in religion in college.
Yeah.
That's probably where this is mainly coming from.
And to me, I think maybe it doesn't bother me quite as much as some other things do, just because it's more ambiguous in maybe what religion it is specifically talking about. To me, I think I mostly was thinking about the like Buddhist aspect, both because of like they talk about Buddhism quite a bit in the show, but I just have also developed a like more greater understanding of different practices of Buddhism, and I know like I guess like their feelings towards like suffering and how you have to like in order to avoid suffering, like you have to detach yourself from the desires essentially. So that to me did not feel as troublesome as if like I would be more bothered if it was like, and now I am convinced there's an afterlife or something like that, which Miles does say something about how like there is no like energy doesn't go away or something, like once energy is created it just moves on or something. I don't know. I don't remember what he's talking about, but he's trying to quote physics or something in like a spiritual way.
I mean, that is also a Buddhist thing. Recently, I watched The Good Place, and it did really, this like idea struck me where the apparently Buddhist monks, as quoted from The Good Place, so take that with a grain of salt, they have this analogy where like human life is like a wave, and it's there, and then it's gone. So what happens when the human wave is gone? Like the energy is still there, it still goes back, but we don't know where it goes. So I do think that would be in line with some kind of religious belief, or just the thinking of human life as an energy is in itself religious or just spiritual.
If I didn't know what John Green's background was, I wouldn't even necessarily like think about it in the context of being like subtly religious at all. Necessarily, I would just think of those just being like general questions that you would ask yourself, especially around when somebody dies. So to me, I don't even really think about it in that context, except for that, which I mean that's a pretty big deal that the author does have that background. So it's not just like to throw that out of the way.
And I'm a firm believer that you really shouldn't separate the author from the work and their background and their life experiences. I think this Looking for Alaska as his first book, he put a lot of himself into it. But John is a firm believer of books belong to the readers, and kind of like Death of the Author, where we are allowed to have our own interpretation. He just makes the words on the page, and it's up to us to decide and what meaning we garner from it. There is no authority.
Kind of like with these big questions that these teens are asking in this book, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I don't really feel like any of my friends were asking those questions when I was in high school. I don't think any of my friends were like, how do we get out of this labyrinth of suffering, Savanah? Unless it was like some kind of like emo poetry on DeviantArt. I don't think that anybody just like casually came up to me saying that or asking like how they could find their great, perhaps. Which to me, especially in like rewatching the show now, a lot of the dialogue I just felt kind of like nobody talks like that though. Like all of their kind of like nicknames that they have for each other and their code words. I don't know. That just like has kind of bothered me, and I think that kind of speaks to some like other things that have like maybe bothered me either with the Vlog brothers as time has gone on, or just like my own relationship with that type of like maybe pretentiousness as time has gone on. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that stuff?
I understand where you're coming from, and in general, I think I agree with you. But do I think that there are certain circumstances that align where certain aspects of that can form in a friendship group and in certain relationships that you have? Absolutely. Have I had these conversations with people? Of course I have. I don't think you know what kind of friends I have, but I've had some pretty existential friends that, I mean, we definitely have had these conversations before, and they're not like all the time, but neither were the conversations in Looking for Alaska all the time. and we did have a lot of fun. And as for code names, I mean, I worked at Girl Scout camp. We all had Girl Scout names, and I think it can be a part of the culture. We still call each other all those names outside of camp, and it feels unreal to call them different names. And I wouldn't be surprised if a private enclosed school like that, like nickname culture, was a thing. So I think all the elements like put into looking for Alaska seem a bit like unrealistic, but I think all those elements taken out don't seem unrealistic. And we just have to have a certain suspension of disbelief when watching film and media, and just know that it's not necessarily all true to life. At least that's not what this was going for.
And I will say, like, I feel like as I've gotten older and in college and as an adult, like, I have had conversations like that with my friends. I just, like, thinking back to, like, high school, I don't recall my friends most of the time. I mean, I feel like probably as I, like, towards the end of my high school, where I had more friends who had just more real life experiences, that they would ask, like, bigger questions, but maybe not as, like, I don't know, like, nicely written as, like, you would see in this book. And I think that, like, at some point in time, I feel like I personally, I guess, had, like, a shift where I stopped liking things that were so either, like, self-referential or were just kind of, like, I don't know, pretentious, I guess, is, like, the only word that I could say, but I don't know that that's really the right word. I don't, like, I think something's, like, at a certain point, I started to get annoyed with, like, all of the inside jokes in the Vlogbrothers, for instance, like, in their videos. Like, at a certain point, I found those things less charming, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. I know that I became probably pretty pretentious, initially maybe because of the Vlogbrothers. They definitely were probably, like, a contributing factor to that in the beginning. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think I've become less pretentious as, like, after maybe graduating college, at least I hope I have. And I've been trying to think about, like, why maybe I had a shift like that, and I don't know if it's just a matter of, like, getting older, that you just, like, want to be more real of a person rather than, like, putting on airs for people, or if it is something else, or just having more life experience or meeting more people who have more life experiences that, like, just don't have time to, like, bother with things like that. But I don't know. What is, like, your experience, I guess, been, Ryan, with, like, things of that nature or pretentiousness?
Yeah, I would say it was pretty pretentious up through senior year of high school in particular. As in, I was really wanting to talk about those big questions and think about religion and how I was interpreting Christianity and how I was interpreting Islam. And I mean, especially around the time where we had a death in our marching band, and I was more interested in talking about the afterlife. So I feel like I probably moved on. I don't think that I've fully moved on. In all honesty, I do get really sick of people talking about non-important things, especially when people talk about work. I get really upset at people for talking about work all the time, or stocks, even though I'd rather, like, talking about Pokemon cards, fine. Stocks, please, just shut up. Please. I get so uninterested when people just talk about themselves, and I immediately dismiss them as uninteresting and people who only care about money and people who don't have hobbies of their own, and I think that they have failed relationships, and I make all these jumps about them just because they're talking about stocks. And I know that's not fair. And I know that's not right, but I do think that's a holdover from this era of books, and John Green wasn't the only one like this. But I do think there's a holdover from that era of trying to grow up and think big and think complexly.
I just think it's so interesting because I feel like you never have conversations like that with me. Or, like, you never bring up, like, big questions with me. And so sometimes when
I think that
when people ask me about, like, your thoughts on things, sometimes I'm like, I don't really know. So I just think that's kind of interesting.
Well, I think that talking about your interests and like what makes you happy is like a big thing. So I think that's what I really like to talk about. And I like to know what makes people tick, and I like to know what people thrive on. And I think that's like a big question for me. And a lot of people are not able to answer that question. They'll talk about like, oh, I used to like Pokemon. I'm like, okay, well, what do you do now? They don't have an answer. They talk about stocks, Savanah. They talk about stocks.
Right. I don't think you know that many people like that into stocks.
I don't know. I had an insurance job for a while. You don't know the kind of people who work there.
That's true.
It's stocks or drinking, which I understand. Like drinking, like I can kind of get on board with that for a while. But if someone talks about the same thing for too long, not that I don't ask people big questions all the time. Like I don't really care that much about it and their beliefs, especially because, okay, well, I'm atheist, so I definitely don't care about other people's beliefs. So it's not a big question to me anymore, Savanah. It's not a big question.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm like kind of similar. I think I just, whenever somebody has like is saying something to me that I think is uninteresting, like stocks, which in my head I keep thinking stonks because of the memes. But whenever somebody talks to me about something like stocks or whatever else that I think is just like bullshit or just uninteresting, more so actually, well, okay, I either like I try to just have like empathy for them or maybe just compassion of being like, you know, this person only has like so much that they can offer me with their conversation. Like, I don't know what else is going on in their mind right now. So I'm not going to try to judge them for that. But then the more so what I'll start to feel like is they're just a cog in the capitalist machine. And that is what I don't like. And that's what I'm more likely to start judging them on now.
See, but that's a holdover from your past pretentiousness self.
Is it? Because I feel like when I was pretentious in the literary, trying to learn about religious sense, I didn't really have any real understanding of capitalism or any of those kinds of things as much, at least, which I think led to me being like, the things that I was pretentious about now mean less to me. So it's just, I more so feel like it's pretentious maybe in a different way.
Yeah, it's evolved. I mean, you have evolved.
Yeah.
And now you're anti-establishment, but that's also a belief system that you're passionate about.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's like the same thing. And I wanted to bring up as well how I had this thought earlier where I feel like before, when we were younger and we were trying to answer all these big questions, and we dismissed people who were like, you know, vapid or had nothing to say. We probably shouldn't dismiss those people. They probably do have stuff to say, but that's how I thought about them. And now how I'm dismissive of people who only care about like money and capitalism. And like, I feel like people who are pretentious now are those TikTokers on their kind of pedestal for knowing all these things about all these organizations and ways to help, and they kind of hold that over you like, oh, you don't know about this. And I feel like it's not the most welcoming community when it should be, because we're all trying to help each other and be better as a human race.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I feel like a lot of those videos are like, you're doing this wrong, or you never knew this, and it's always kind of aggressive when the people who are watching them more than likely already do know or they have some inclination. So I'm not sure why it is always like that. But I do kind of understand, I guess, like some feelings of maybe defensiveness that they might have that might turn into that aggression, I guess. But I don't know. I more so when I see the youth of today making their TikToks like that, I more so just feel like proud of them, I guess, because I feel like it's like so much further ahead than we were in our youth, and I'm glad to see them moving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I feel proud of them too. I think it's the right direction. However, I do feel like we're too quick to eat our own. I feel like it's a phrase that's been going around a lot, and to make snap judgments about people. But that's a different topic for another day. And I think that's its own form of pretentiousness that needs to disintegrate so we can be a more welcoming community. Savanah, I actually have a question for you. You wrote the cult of the Vlogbrothers, and I've never heard them referred that way. Like, it's written here on this bullet point right in front of me. So would you care to elaborate on what you mean by the cult of the Vlogbrothers? Because I don't, actually. I don't know what you mean.
Well, that's a Savanah original term that I came up with. And I guess technically it would be referred to as nerdfighteria. But I feel like when I think about my time in that community, and I can't really speak to what the community is like today, but when I think about my time in that community, it kind of felt a little cult-like in a sense of like people really, really idolizing John and Hank, and they kind of created this whole empire almost. I mean, that's kind of an extreme way to say it, but they did kind of create an empire of loyal fans and of like things to make money. And I think kind of stepping back, like you kind of said, Ryan, like a lot of like women at a certain point were like, why am I listening to these two old white men like make all these things for me and tell me about things? I think it's just like part of that. And just, I don't know, I think part of me more as I've got older has been kind of like waiting to see if something bad will come out about them. I mean, I hope it doesn't, but unfortunately I wouldn't be like shocked just by the nature of how that happens all the time nowadays. We find out bad things about people, but more so I think just like the fandom of it, and that's not unique to this fandom. I think most fandoms are kind of like that. So that's what I mean by cult of the Vlogbrothers.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know what you mean. There has been a couple of things to come out about them or to be questioned. I mean, they're preying on young girls. It's kind of a similar thing that Shane Dawson has been accused of. I mean, and rightfully so in the case of Shane Dawson. But people kind of have the same realization of, wow, I'm a young girl. There's a lot of young girls in this audience as well, and we're all idolizing these old white men, as you put it. So I think that right now the fandom has matured along with them, and that the people who have stuck around are now kind of all my age or older, and there's still like young people out there, don't get me wrong, but the fan base is a bit more mature, and I think they've kind of grown up with the internet, and the internet has just changed and evolved a lot, and they now have a platform I feel like they can really kind of be proud of, and they have a whole history of what it was like to get there. So I think that is really miraculous. They've also been kind of accused of just lack of racial diversity in a lot of their platforms. I do think they try to hire a lot of people at Complexly with racial diversity in mind. So I think that one is a little bit outdated, but I mean, Hank lives in Montana and John lives in Indiana. So I think it's hard if you're in a community and you're white and you're surrounded by a lot of white people. I can understand that it is challenging to branch out and make friends. I mean, as it is for me, I struggle to have racially diverse friends surround myself as well. In fact, sometimes I'm the only racially diverse person present at a friend gathering of mine. So take that for what you will. I'm not proud of it. And there was also the controversy with The Fault in Our Stars, where Ansel Elgort and Shailene Woodley had their makeout session at the Anne Frank house. I don't think it was filmed at the Anne Frank house, but a lot of people did not think that it was appropriate for that scene to have taken place at all.
I mean, it's not as bad as Justin Bieber writing "She Would Have Been a Belieber" in like the book at the Anne Frank house, so at least it's not that.
And not that I want to defend them. I think there is some kind of weird creepiness along with them, and that the fan base, along with anything that has a young fan base attached to it, can be annoying. Because people just hate young women and anything that they're associated with. So it just naturally seems annoying.
I wonder too, like, I guess I would like to know more about maybe what types of safeguards they try to have in place as far as like, especially when they have like live events and things like that for their younger audiences, and specifically like the young women that attend like their concerts or different things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we went to a concert somewhat recently, a couple of years ago, and I don't recall there being a lot of really young people there. Do you?
No, I feel like I recall probably mostly people like our age being there.
So I don't know. I don't want to like look and pull out all the receipts that I could find, but I did do some Googling, and it was hard to come up with some things. So that's pretty impressive for having such a long history of being on YouTube and not having a ton of stuff come out about you.
Good on them, I guess. I don't know. Hopefully by the time this comes out, nothing like new has surfaced about them.
Anyways, I think that about wraps it up. Any final closing thoughts?
I would just say if you're like me and you read the book and you waited to watch the show for whatever reason, I would say it's still worth going back and rewatching it. Even if you didn't read the book, if you are of our generation, you probably will still find it to be nostalgic and thoughtful and heartwarming. So I would recommend.
Yeah, very, very fun. If you're born before 1996, 100% check it out. I had a lot of fun watching it again and talking about it. It's something that I'm passionate about, and I love young adult novels. I love them. I love them so much.
So thank you everybody for hanging out with us today. Like always, in our description, you can find links to our Patreon if you want to help support us on the podcast. And make sure to like and subscribe.
Goodbye.
Bye.